and welcome to episode number 15 of Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes. I'm Patricia Steere. Glad to have you here. My guest, you probably know him because he's made a splash on the scene on YouTube as of late. His name is Brian Mullin, and he's here today to talk a little bit about math. And math isn't my strong suit, but it is yours. Brian, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Patricia.
Tell us a little bit about your background. I know you live in Florida, and I live in Houston. So between the two of us, we've got the space program covered, right?
Yes, I'm about 45 minutes from Kennedy Space Center, and I actually took two physics courses in high school. I took just regular physics in 11th grade, and then I liked it so much that I went on and took AP my senior year, and then I went to college to become an engineer, where I took a couple more physics courses, and then got my degree in engineering. And then as far as it's related to flat Earth theory or space, anything really, anything relating to this, I went also and took astronomy. I went back to school in the fall of 2013 and took that course just to see what was going on, and it left me with a lot more questions than answers, because I was really trying to figure out what this world is and what's going on here, and why we're here. Lots of questions I had, and I ended up with more. And so I kind of went from there, just researching. I looked into electric universe theory for a little bit. I had been doubting gravity for a very long time, and ended up here.
I see you've got a telescope behind you. What do you use it? Do you use it a lot, or?
Yes, I do. I actually bought it a few months ago because I was I was trying to find curvature across the surface of water with it, really. And I've been looking at the moon and the stars and other things now with it as well, because it's very exciting to look at them. But it's great for doing flat Earth experiments as well.
Did you use it during the eclipse? Were you able to see it? Some people that are friends of mine in Florida had bad luck with clouds. Other people had good views.
Yeah, I had it by the front door, but it was really cloudy, so my neighbors and I just kind of hung out and watched the clouds. We didn't get to see anything, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was going to hang out with one of the people, not Crow 777, but one of the people who also has filmed the so-called lunar wave, who also lives in Texas. And I had not met him before, but I was going to go over to where he lives in Texas and meet his family and then watch the eclipse there. But it turned out to be actually even raining here. So it was a wash, so to speak. Sad, because we have to wait a long time to have that happen again.
Yeah.
The whole thing with lunar eclipses, I'm kind of mystified as to exactly what's going on. They seem manipulated. They don't seem real. And of course, it's not the shadow of Earth, at least from my perspective. But we're not here to talk about my perspective. We're here to talk about yours. So you got your degree, and life went on and all of that. About maybe 8 to 9 months ago, something happened. You were watching the movie Gravity, and then not Gravity, Interstellar, excuse me, and your whole world changed. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, actually, I went and saw Interstellar, and I was blown away. But I thought it was a good movie. I'd studied relativity. I was into the electric universe theory at that point, and so I was trying to equate the two and figure out how things work. And the movie actually didn't make me question anything, really. What happened was a coworker of mine brought the Science of Interstellar book to work one day, and we flipped through it before work, and I happened to just I looked through it and I thought, this is interesting. This makes sense in some ways. And then the day went on, and that exact day, for some reason, I usually listen to like a report on the economy or something on YouTube, a radio show or something while I'm working. I don't really pay attention to them. It's just background noise to help me work. When I was in college, I always listened to music to study, so it's just how I like to do things. And So I was looking through YouTube videos, and this Flat Earth WikiLeaks popped up, and that's when I said, "Well, what's this?" And I just said, "What the heck? I'll just listen to this." And it was actually Matt Boylan's stand-up, or Matthew Powerland, and so I started listening to it, and within a few minutes I was cracking up because it's hilarious. But questions started to arise in my head. And I didn't put too much into it, but I said, he's got a lot of good points here, especially when it comes to the photos of Earth. And so it was in the back of my mind. It stayed there. And then in the first episode of my series, I mentioned that I was sitting on the couch and another flat Earth video came up, and I decided to watch it. And thinking like, okay, I can prove this wrong. Like the Earth is not flat. And well, about halfway into it, I was saying this is there's a lot of things. They've got a lot of good points here. These are things I've never thought about before, and I'm going to have to try to prove this wrong because, for 30 years I've thought I lived on a spinning ball in space, and I went from there. And one of the first things I did was I think the video I actually watched was the Flat Earth conspiracy like montage documentary with all the music that Eric DeBay did, and it's a good video. And so I watched that, and I I said, okay, how can I check this? What can I do? So I said, well, Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral are 45 minutes away, and so I started looking on Google Earth, and I found a beach access about 7 miles south of the port of Cape Canaveral, where all the cruise ships come in and out, where the beach kind of juts out a little bit. So I knew that if I got on the beach down there, about 7 miles away, I could lay down on the beach and try to see the beach where the water would be washing up on the shore 7 miles away. And based on some quick calcs, I figured I shouldn't be able to see it. Well, I could see it. So that's kind of where I got started, and I started watching ships disappear over the horizon, and over the horizon is what I thought. But when I took out my binoculars and looked at them, they say that the reason that we know the Earth is curved is because the bottom of a ship disappears over the horizon when it gets out of your sight first before the top of the ship. But if you go to the beach with binoculars or a telescope, and if you're by a port and you watch a ship until it gets to the horizon and the bottom starts to disappear, and you have a powerful pair of binoculars, and you pull out your binoculars and look at it, surprise, you can see the whole ship again. So there's really not a curve in the way it doesn't seem like. And so that's what really made me start questioning things. And I started thinking, okay, maybe it's a bigger ball than we thought. What could this be? And I started doing problems. And the very first problem I did was the planes flying on the spinning ball, because I'd seen the questions about how a plane could fly relative to the Earth spinning. And so I tried to set the problem up myself, because I've read a lot about relativity, and then I ran into that problem. And I actually asked a couple coworkers about it, some other engineers, and they kind of scratched their heads and said, it just does, or, the atmosphere slows the plane down. And I said, well, you guys aren't really giving me answers here. And they said, well, it just does. Planes take off and land every day. But I said, well, I gotta get more into this. So I kept that problem and kept doing research for 7 or 8 more months, and then I finally decided to film the problem and put it out there and say, hey, help me out here. What am I missing? Is really what I was trying to do. But the feedback I got was pretty amazing, so I decided to keep going with it.
It's Brian Mullin from Balls Out Physics. That is his YouTube channel. And I just sort of stumbled across your video and just said, wow, this is exactly what we need. We have a lot of people on the, the round earth, the ball camp, using math, physics to prove that it's round. But we have a lot, but we don't have as much as we should. As many as we should, doing what you're doing. And just the way you approached it was just so fresh, just you right there with your hat on, and you're just talking like a friend, just telling you, just breaking it down. And I thought, this is fantastic. And I immediately said, I must have him on my show. So, and now you've done 3 videos now, and they're all equally good, and you've kind of moved through different sorts of problems as you've gone. But let's talk about the first video and the planes on the plane. So explain the runways and all of that like you did in your video, in case there's somebody who hasn't watched it yet.
Okay, well, in the problem, I based it off of a flight I actually took in college. We were able to get a direct flight from. I went to school at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville, and in one of my senior projects, we actually did very well in a competition and got to fly to LA to compete nationally, and we found a direct flight to LAX, and so that was a good amount of distance, and it was, the 2 airports are roughly on the same latitude compared to the whole size of the Earth. So I decided to set up a problem where the plane flies, the return flight flies from an airport at LAX directly towards an airport at Jacksonville International Airport, and it's hypothetical. In the problem, we assume that the two airports are on the same latitude, so the plane never really has to turn north or south during the flight. It just flies due east, and we also assume, and the problem, I wish I would have reiterated this more when I was talking about it, is that we are a stationary observer looking at the Earth, so we can see the Earth and the plane rotating together at the same time. So you do have to account for both velocities. And when you actually calculate the velocity of the Earth at what it would have to be at the equator, if the circumference is just under 25,000 miles, I think it's 24,901 miles is what is the accepted mainstream belief. And there's 24 hours a day. In a day, you just divide, the circumference 24,901 by 24 hours, and that gives you over 1,000 miles per hour. So that's pretty fast. And so if you can figure out what the velocity would be of the airports a certain distance from the equator by using the curvature equation to reduce your diameter and then go from there. So the idea is the Earth is always spinning under the plane, but the plane has the initial velocity of the Earth when it takes off, so the speeds are added. But the problem comes into play when the plane tries to turn and land on the runway that's moving, because the plane has gained so much velocity in the air that now when it turns, it can't stop flying. So the way relative motion works, it still has a component of velocity to the east. So it ends up moving faster than the runway it's trying to land on, and that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense because we see planes take off and land in all different on runways in all different directions, north, south, east, west, whatever. And then the other major problem I realized is that at 2,000 miles, the curvature, I think it was around 100, the amount of curvature that the plane would have to fly over, I think is about 150 miles of vertical curvature. And so, plane flies, when they take off, they get up to a cruising altitude of about 5 miles or 30,000 feet, 33,000 feet. And, the plane takes off and it's 5 miles in the air, and now it still has 145 miles of curvature it has to fly over. So how is it going to fly over that curvature unless the pilot is constantly nosing the plane down the whole time? And some people say gravity, and I presented my argument to that of why that would actually cause a problem in reverse. And so it's a head scratcher when you really think about it.
Some people, as well as gravity, they say, well, it's built into the autopilot feature. So, I mean, what about people who fly older planes? And there's people that do have older planes out there that don't have that built in. So I say no to that. Yeah. So continue on with your story.
That's in a nutshell. That's the problem. I couldn't find an answer. I was asking people, and of course, people thought I was crazy for even asking this. But I'm saying, well, we don't have an answer. I can't figure this out. And people say it just does. Planes take off and land every day, and I say yes, but that doesn't prove that the Earth is spinning. So I did the problem over and over again. I showed it to a lot of people, engineers, people with science backgrounds, and nobody could really give me a good answer. And so that is when I decided I've got to put this out there and see what people say. And for the most part, a lot of people agreed with me, it seems like. Like I said, I'm always ready to be proven wrong. I said in one of my videos, and in the engineering world, we say, you learn 10 times more from your mistakes than you do from your success. And I believe that. I think it's more like 100 times more. So, people are always afraid to be wrong, but how can you learn what's right if you've never wrong to figure out what is right? So that's the approach I'm kind of taking here. And I'm having trouble proving that flat Earth theory is wrong. So actually, the evidence is showing me that it is actually true. So
you wouldn't really call yourself a flat earther, but you're heading toward that. You're kind of a ball Earth skeptic at this point.
Yes, I could be called either one. Really, the evidence shows me that it's flat and stationary. There is much more evidence based on just pure analysis that it's flat and stationary, and especially when I started considering the thermosphere where the International Space Station and the satellites are supposed to be, I realized that it's kind of not possible for them to really be there, and that's what episode 4 is going to be on. And once that hit me, I said, okay, well, I can't really trust NASA. I don't really trust the government anyway. Actually, I saw a great meme the other day that said those who trust the government must have failed history class. So I thought that was great and makes a lot of sense. And NASA is a government agency, so. Um,
When did you find out about the moon landing? When was that something that you kind of said that that can't be true?
that was actually, I was in college when I realized that. I was an intern for an engineering firm, and a guy I worked with one day said, "Hey, Brian, have you ever thought about the moon landings?" And he showed me this website, and it's basically questioning the footage and so many different things. And a light bulb kind of went off in my head. Like immediately, I was like, wait a second. And I said, we went to the moon in 1969. We've never been back. And so I said, I really need to look into this. And I mean, that was probably around 2005 or so. And he was questioning. Of course, another coworker of ours got really angry that we were we were even questioning it, that we were standing there talking about this. And so I started looking into it, and I mean, right away, I just said, this can't be real. They definitely faked it, and I thought they faked it to fool the Russians back then, and that's what I thought for 10 years. And of course, in Interstellar, they actually say that, which I think is hilarious. And of course, now right after seeing Interstellar, I'm looking into the theory I'm looking into, and yeah, the moon landing is a very sore subject for many people. It seems you can't. It's almost like you're un-American if you question it, but there's just so many things that don't make sense. And I actually had a retired surveyor from Colorado called me at work on Monday of this week. He saw one of my videos, and he tracked me down and called me at work. I thought it was pretty funny, and um, he said to me, he brought up a very good point, something I'd never thought about, and this is why I say we all need to work together on this. He said, so say you're going to the moon and you take off from Earth, and you leave Earth's orbit and you're headed in a straight line towards the moon. And they said, how do you take a picture out of the backside of the spacecraft? Isn't that where the engines are? I said, wow, I never thought of that. How are you going to look out of the back of the spacecraft? It's like the same thing as taking off in a plane and trying to take the picture of the runway you just took off from. You can't do it. So, I mean, there's so many things about the moon landing that it's just, I don't even know where
I
to
never
start.
thought of that one. That one's one I hadn't thought of before. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I was thinking the other day, and I think I might have mentioned this in a previous video, why whenever anything takes off, when NASA, blasts a rocket off, we only get the view of the rocket taking off looking at the ground. We don't ever get a view from the top of the rocket looking forward into space. Why? Well, probably because there's no space, as they have told us space is like. Was it a problem for you, Brian, when, you were a person who's watching Interstellar, and, we're all, people who grew up with all Star Wars, Star Trek, and all of these space programs. It's a very enticing world where there's planets and exploration and perhaps other beings and all of this magic and the Hubble. Was it hard for you to kind of let that go?
Yes, actually, I started looking into this in January of this year, in the middle of January, and about 2 months in, I really started to doubt what we were being told, and I started to realize that space might not even be real. And I was very, very big into exploring space, and that's why I'm so adamant about showing that something's not right here. When I was in my teens, I discovered dark energy, and I thought it was amazing. This whole concept of this energy that counteracts gravity, and um, I really spent a lot of time, staring at the stars, thinking about outer space. Of course, I loved Star Wars as a kid and all these things, and I got a little depressed. I'm not going to lie. I just said, "Wow, this might not even be real. This whole imaginary thing, or it could be an imaginary thing in all of our imaginations, in my own mind and everyone else's." And I don't know what to do now. There's a new Star Wars coming out this year, and can I even go watch that now? I mean, I guess it still could just be an imaginary land, just like any other kind of movie we watch, like Lord of the Rings or something like that, if you want. But yeah, it was tough, and I actually stopped looking at flat Earth theory for maybe a month or so, and just said, I got to come to grips with this, and I did, and then I couldn't resist it. I had to go back and keep looking because it's just so interesting.
I agree with what you're saying with when it comes to space movies. I definitely will be watching any space movie that's good that comes out. But I know now that it's a lot of programming in there,
Mm.
like you spoke of earlier. And also, I know enough about the whole flat earth to not actually be fooled or drawn in or programmed by the stuff. And I'll just be able to enjoy it for what it is. And maybe even actually laugh at it and say things like, that could never happen. So maybe by looking at it from that perspective, we can have a different level of fun by watching some of our favorite, space series or new movies that come out, just sort of laughing at them and then also kind of escaping, like you said, into like a Lord of the Rings sort of fantasy. But it is a hard thing to give up. I mean, I was a big time classic Star Trek fan. So, I was sad when Leonard Nimoy died. I mean, because Leonard Nimoy, that's Spock. That's my favorite character. I actually felt depressed that whole day, which is ludicrous because, I mean, it wasn't even a real character. I mean, it wasn't even a real, Spock's not a real person. So it was my first crush, though, so that says a lot about me. Anyway, yeah, we all grew up with these things, and we have to let them go, or at least let them morph into something else. It's Brian Mullin here today on Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes, and I'm Patricia Steere. Now you know about my secret crush. And Brian is a licensed professional engineer in Florida. He's a structural engineer, and so you've got the views of Cape Canaveral. Have you seen things take off that much? Do you go and watch? Do you keep track of what's being shot up?
Every now and then I'll see a rocket go up. Lately, I have not. When I first moved down to Central Florida about 5, 6 years ago, I went and saw a couple shuttle launches. Well, I didn't actually go out to Cape Canaveral because, I mean, from Orlando, it's I mean, you can see them pretty close. And one time I did experience a sonic boom. So what I thought it was that rattled all the windows and woke me up. I was sleeping, and then I found out a shuttle had landed. But I don't really know what creates that. I'd like to look into that a little bit because now I'm questioning whether it's coming out of space or something just flying really fast. When you look into how the shuttle works, it actually seems like more of an aircraft than a spaceship. But yeah, every now and then I'll see a rocket go up. I'll just happen to catch one, and it's kind of cool. But I don't now. I'm questioning them. Well, where's it really going? It goes up and then it disappears out of my sight, and it always travels out to the east over the water, and then you can't see it anymore. It disappears from view. So you could say it goes into space, or you just can't see it. Um,
Jaron of Jaronism has a video, and I'm not sure which one it is, but those who are in the know probably do. And it shows pieces of various uh, space, basically space junk that was supposed to, be destroyed in the atmosphere as it fell back to Earth. But it's right there with like numbers on it. I mean, it's found somewhere nearby. So where it goes, probably it comes right back down and crashes somewhere. And maybe that's why, the places where things are launched are always near water. That could be one of the many, many reasons. But of course, we've been told it's because, the astronauts have to splash down somewhere. So
mhm.
I don't know. I mean, I bought all that stuff. We all did. And looking back on it now, especially when it comes to things like curvature, I think, how did I ever believe any of that? I've flown, since I was maybe like 4 or 5 years old on planes, with my parents and stuff. And I always looked out the window because, especially when you're a child, you're excited by looking at like the small buildings down below and the small cars. But I never really thought of looking for curvature. But after Flat Earth came into my life around, March or so, before I was actually it takes some time to digest it. You're not immediately, the minute you watch a flat Earth video, going to come out in public and start telling people about flat Earth because you have to think about it for a while. And it took me a long time to think about it. But now when I fly, I look out of the window and I'm looking for curvature. And I know there isn't any, but I'm still looking. So, what about you? You said you have done different measurements, and I do want to talk about the curvature equation, what it's supposed to be. But in flying and such, just casually, are you looking for curvature?
Yeah, actually, the first time I've flown since I discovered flat Earth theory was in about a month ago, and I took off from the Sanford Airport, which is north of Orlando. It's a very quiet airport, very nice airport to take off from. And it was a very clear morning. I got very lucky. It was very early in the morning, and right when we took off heading due north. I was flying up to North Carolina, and when we took off, I looked out to the east, and I had no clouds in the sky. I could see all the way to the horizon, and I could see the sun rising, and I was amazed at how flat, and the fact that what everybody always says when you're on a plane, or what the flat Earth community says when you're on a plane, the horizon is always at your eye level, no matter how high you go. And sure enough, I mean, what I was expecting to see. I was expecting to see that, but I was still very surprised at how obvious it was. And right at that moment, I realized whenever I was flying before, I was always looking down at the ground. Kind of like you said, I wanted to see cars and houses and mountains and trees and just look at how small they were. I never really thought about looking out at the horizon to check if it was a curve, because I was always told, of course, you can't see the curve if you're at 30,000 feet. You've got to go higher than that. And for some reason, it just never seemed like something to question. But yeah, after I did my kind of just look through the binoculars experiment at Cape Canaveral, and it wasn't definite proof to me, and I didn't have exact measurements then. I hadn't done enough curvature calculations. I was still finding out how much the Earth is actually supposed to curve, which really blew my mind, because after all, becoming my degree is actually in civil engineering. Getting a civil engineering degree and taking all these physics courses, we never ever talked about how much the Earth curves per mile. And so I decided to go. I got my telescope and I decided to go to Lake Apopka, which is the second largest lake in Florida, and it's pretty close to my house. And it's 8 miles from the south end to the north end. And based on the curvature calculation, that's about a 42 to 43 foot drop from one end to the other. So I adjusted my telescope. I've actually got it adjusted pretty high behind me, but I could lower the tripod, and so I had it just about 3 feet above the surface of the water. And on a calm morning, I could see the North Shore, and so that should be 42 or 43 feet lower than, well, take away the 3 feet for how high my telescope is off the water line, at 40 feet below my view, but I could see it. So after I did that, I was pretty convinced, and so I'd looked into the equation, and the accepted equation for the curvature of the Earth, and based from the flat Earth community and people who really know how to do spherical trigonometry, is basically, it's roughly 8 inches times the number of miles squared. How far something is away from you is how much drop you should expect to see. And so I drew this up. We discussed this a little bit. When you're looking, if you can see this, I hope this actually comes out.
Yes.
When you're looking at the Earth, if say that point on the top of the circle is where you're standing and you're looking away from you, and that's your line of sight straight away, that distance h would be the drop you would expect to see. And so this equation down here, the curve equation, I've got h is equal to 8 inches times x squared, and x would be in miles. Okay. And so instead of actually going back and deriving the equation, I cheated. I have access to AutoCAD, which is drafting software, and if you know anything about drafting, it is the original drafting software. All engineers out there have probably used it once in their life. And I went in and I drew a circle with a radius of 3,959 miles, which you have to convert to feet, and it comes out over to 20 million feet. And I started drawing lines. And I was doing that because I'd found that somebody in the flat Earth community, or researching flat Earth, had made this chart, which I think I showed in my first video, this curvature chart. And what he did was he drew this circle, and then he drew the horizontal line out just like in my sketch, and started plotting points to figure out how much drop you would see for every mile away from your view you go, assuming that your view is right on the surface of Earth where you start. And so I took his chart, and then I took the curvature equation, and I went into AutoCAD and I started drawing this, and I was getting the exact numbers. So I know the equation's right, because the AutoCAD draws a perfect circle that would be the same radius of the Earth. And what I find pretty strange, though, is when you search for the amount of curvature per mile on Google, it takes you to Wikipedia, and then it shows you this problem with two people standing 18 miles apart, and it basically tells you, I think it tells you that there'd be 6 feet of drop over 9 miles. I think I have that right, because it's 8 times 9, and they basically are telling you that it's 8 inches times the number of miles, not times the number of miles squared. But that can't be, because that's a slope. That's a straight line, linear a slope. That's not a curve. The curve is, as I showed in this diagram, it's constantly curving down away from your view. So as you move farther and farther away, the amount of curve increases as it gets farther away from you. So what you actually would end up with would be something that looks like this. I mean, this is not exactly to scale, but you see that the H I've got over here next to my index finger, if you can see that, if you multiply just 8 inches times the number of miles you come out, which I've got as X up here, you would really just create a triangle or a line sloping down away from you. It wouldn't be a curve. So that's not correct, and it's very surprising to me that that's the first thing that comes up when you go to Google and type this in. It's just like, well, they kind of hide it though, because in the problem they have, they do the curvature calculation right, but they make it appear like it's 8 inches times the 9 miles away, which it's not, because they take out the two men standing, they take out their 6 foot height, and it's some trickery, it seems like, or it's just what they came up with, but it's not the exact way to do it. So that's puzzling why it's like that.
I believe that it's done on purpose, and the 8 inches per mile is what you find when you look up on Google or Wikipedia, and it's all connected. And I think it's a way that people who are new to flat Earth, who just heard about it, and maybe they're talking to a flat earther or saw a video, they want to find out about the curvature, because finding out about curvature is a very easy way that almost anybody can do. Like you were saying, go to the beach and get a zoom camera and you can look and see across. So people who are new to it and want to disprove it immediately, want to debunk, and they look up the curvature, and where do they find? Wikipedia, Google, and they find 8 inches per mile is the curvature. Mm-hmm. And they'll swear on their family's lives that that's what it is, because there it is, right in black and white on Wikipedia. Mm-hmm. Google, it's right there. And when you start telling them it's 8 inches per mile squared, if it's 8 inches per mile, you're living on a pyramid. And we don't live on a pyramid or a slope, but it's impossible, because the people that are trying to debunk are so programmed, so brainwashed, that they can't think outside. And I was brainwashed too. I mean, we all were. That's how we grew up. But when presented with new information, it's a good idea to do what you did, Brian, and what I've done, and what many in the flat Earth community have done. Just push aside all of those voices in your head saying, that's dumb, and continue pushing forward and looking. And that's really the only way to get to the truth. So I encourage anyone who has found 8 inches per mile and is thinking that that's, the way the Earth supposedly curves, it's 8 inches per mile squared. So just putting that out there in case there's somebody new to flat Earth who happens to be watching this video. It wouldn't be the first video I would recommend anybody watch if they're new to flat Earth. But hey, you never know what videos you're going to stumble on. I mean, you mentioned yours. I stumbled on Mark Sargent's Flat Earth Clues. And once you watch one video or a series of videos, then you go to the next, and you go to the next, and then you go to the next, and then you wind up saying, wow, the Earth is flat. So it's Brian Mullin here today. Balls Out Physics is the name of his YouTube channel. He's got 3 videos. He's coming out with a 4th one. And let's talk about, you already touched on it, but what is the 4th one? What is that all about? What you're going to come up with for us?
That video is going to be on the thermosphere, well, sphere, I say. That's what it's called. The thermosphere layer of our atmosphere. It's supposed to be basically the last layer before you get into the exosphere, which basically becomes space. The remaining, what's supposed to be the remaining gas in the exosphere kind of thins out and becomes space. I don't know if I'm saying that exactly right, but in the thermosphere, the temperature in the upper layer of the thermosphere is supposed to range from about 500 degrees Celsius to about 2,000 degrees Celsius, and that's really, really hot. And when I was still in my questioning phase, I remember it was a Friday night, and I just happened to be watching flat Earth videos, and somebody said, "Hey, how does the International Space Station stay in the thermosphere? How does it exist in the thermosphere when the temperature can get up to 2,000 degrees Celsius?" And immediately I thought, wow, the melting point of aluminum is 600 degrees Celsius, so how is that possible? And then immediately after that, I thought about my astronomy professor standing in our class telling us this, and she held her hand up like this to imitate holding a thermometer, and she said, the temperature in the thermosphere gets up to 2,000 degrees Celsius, but the gas particles are so far apart that the the thermometer would actually show a very cold temperature because there's not enough gas particles to transfer the energy of the heat to the thermometer, because heat is really a measure of kinetic energy. And so I remember sitting in my class and I was like, well, basic thermodynamics was actually one of my favorite courses I took in college. The basic premise is that hot always moves to cold through convection or conduction, or some way it moves to cold. And so I didn't, that was really strange to me, that kind of defied what I was taught. And I didn't really think about it too much back then. I didn't put two and two together, that the majority of our satellites, or alleged satellites, and the ISS are supposed to be in that layer of the atmosphere, or that layer of the air that's above us. And so I said, that's very puzzling. How does it survive in that temperature? That doesn't make any sense to me. And then the aluminum melts at 600 degrees Celsius. You have circuit boards. You have copper. Copper has a low melting temperature. The melting point of astronauts is going to be much lower than any of that. And so I started thinking, how can they keep the astronauts cool inside the space station? How does their HVAC system work? They're usually hanging out with like a collared shirt on and some pants, and it's probably, like, it looks like it's about room temperature in there, and they're not really sweating. It's very strange to me, but I thought, okay, maybe that's true. Maybe the gas particles are just so far apart. And I kind of said, that's not a very good argument, until I was talking to somebody in the flat Earth community who said to me, how is the ISS grounded? How is the electrical system grounded? And that's when I said, wow, how is it grounded? Electrical stuff, or electrical engineering has always been kind of my weakest area. I'd actually like to go back to school and take some classes in it. I've kind of avoided electrical stuff, but I know that electrical systems all need to be grounded. And so your first thought is, how is a plane grounded? Well, when a plane flies, it has capacitors inside of it. The electrical systems are grounded. Houses are grounded, buildings are grounded, so that you don't build up a static charge between positive and negative polarities. Basically, it has to do with alternating current and the way our electrical systems work. And so when a plane flies, they have capacitors that store that charge, and when they land on the runway, when the wheels touch the runway again, they ground out, and then they lose that charge. But the International Space Station can never touch the ground. And so I started thinking about all kinds of crazy things, like maybe like when a spaceship docks with it, the spaceship takes the charge from it. It has a capacitor or something to take the charge from it. But I mean, that'd be ridiculous. That's so much weight that it would have to carry up there, and they would have to do that constantly. So I said, well, let's get it from the horse's mouth. And I looked up what NASA tells us. And NASA says that the International Space Station grounds through the superheated gas that's all around it, the plasma gas, the gas that's very, very hot, the particles of gas that's all around it, that's not supposed to be heating the station up. They're supposed to be so far apart that it doesn't transfer heat to the station, but there's enough of it around it touching it for it to ground out and dissipate that electric charge. I said, whoa, that's a serious contradiction there. That doesn't really make any sense. And then I started looking into what they call orbital decay, which is somebody else had mentioned this to me too. The ISS is supposed to have this ion thruster on the back of it that they burn. It's like a jet that pushes them forward, but it doesn't work like a jet. They say it sprays ions out into space, and that pushes it forward, which I think is another problem I have with propulsion that I'd like to do an episode on. But anyway, the space station has to keep a certain velocity to maintain its orbit, its altitude, because gravity is always pulling it down. And in episode 3, I explained centripetal force, and that's one of the reasons I'm trying to do these in the series in this order, is to explain some basic physics, so you can see where I'm seeing the problems, and then if anybody can help me figure it out, or if anybody agrees with me, that's the whole point. And so based on centripetal force, because gravity is a centripetal force, is what we're told, the space station has to maintain a minimum velocity to stay at the elevation it is above the Earth. And so the space station loses velocity, apparently, from collisions with gas particles, is what NASA says. So they have to burn this thruster every 6 months or so, or maybe it might be less than that, to bring their speed back up fast enough so they don't get pulled towards the Earth. But at the same time, those particles aren't heating. Those particles that are up around, get up to around 2,000 degrees Celsius aren't overheating the station and melting it. And so it doesn't make any sense. And then you've got the Hubble that's up above the ISS in orbit, which is even hotter, and they have the same exact problems that the ISS does, except it doesn't have astronauts inside of it, and or allegedly, if it's there, and Kepler and all of the satellites that are out there, they're all going to have these same problems because they're all going to be made out of mostly aluminum, because aluminum's light, and that's what we would need to build them out of to get it into orbit, so you don't have to burn all that extra fuel to get it up there, and that also reduces the force of gravity on it because it's all about mass. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then
satellites in general, and like you said, the International Space Station, how are they up there? What are they made of? There's the melting point of gold. They use this gold foil on there, and copper, and all of these things. Just the wiring itself, things would just instantly melt. But we don't think about any of that. And the astronauts would pretty much spontaneously combust, it would seem. They wouldn't be there, with water bubbles. None of that would ever be happening. They just kind of be broiling. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite the puzzle. We're talking with Brian Mullin, and he is a licensed professional engineer based out of Florida, and Balls Out Physics is the name of his YouTube channel. He's on, at this point of this particular recording in October, on his 3rd video, coming up with his 4th, but maybe you're watching this later, so he may have a whole bunch of videos. And as you said, you're kind of going step by step with different physics problems and ways to explain them. What have people said to you, friends of yours, people that you work with, even family members? Do they know what you're doing? I mean, you've mentioned a few people you've kind of bounced ideas off of, but have you had any people saying, hey, you're right, let me look into it, or you're crazy, I don't want to talk to you anymore?
I will say engineers are very hard to talk to about this. A few of them have looked into it. I was messaged by an engineer on Facebook who saw my videos. He's also a civil engineer, and he called the radio show about this. He's been trying to talk to his friends about it, and he said he's been sharing my videos with his engineer friends to get them to try to open their eyes, and he agrees with the theory 100%. But as far as people I've worked with, I haven't pushed it too much at work. I've always been kind of known as the conspiracy theorist at work because I question everything. But I question the Federal Reserve and a lot of different things, and I say we need to do something about it. But most people really just want to live their lives, I've found. As far as my family goes, they definitely watch my videos, and they're very interested. They like watching them. They like what I'm doing. They're supporting me very much. My dad's actually a mechanical engineer, and the first time I told him that I think the Earth might be flat, it might have been better if I told him I was addicted to heroin. But he didn't take it too well. But when I told him about the thermosphere problem and the International Space Station, he really started to say, all right, that's a serious problem. Like, we've got to figure that out. And he's actually very excited about this upcoming video. And he's starting to question things, I can tell, and it's very exciting for me. So I'm definitely getting support, but I knew I would hit resistance from everybody when I did this, but I couldn't stop questioning it, and I'm not getting the answers that I want, or the answers that appease me, make me say, oh, okay, that makes sense, that explains it, because there's just really not a lot of explanations for these things. They seem more like excuses to me. So that's the whole point. Get it out there, see if somebody sees it. But I really don't think from my point of view now, it doesn't really seem like somebody's going to have a good answer for this. I don't see it, but I could be wrong.
Well, with as long as Flat Earth's been out, I mean, you mentioned Matt Boylan bringing it up into the consciousness of people, but not hugely yet. And he'd been doing it for years, and other people had been doing it for hundreds of years, but that was sort of old books and lost information. But then, of course, different people started making videos and bringing it out, and it seems that it is something that, if it were a lie in this recent sort of flat Earth revolution that's been happening for about 9 months, 10 months, whatever, it would have been figured out by now, because now we have things that we can use that we didn't have hundreds of years ago, different, pieces of technology and such. And it's gaining such momentum, and all of us can't be dumb. All of us can't be misled or, living in the dark ages. So I think if it's continuing and building as much as it is now, we've got something here. And, well, obviously that's why we're here. Oh, and I did want to say, hi to Brian's dad. So, one of those "hi mom" moments. So yeah, I
I'm
think
sure.
it's great that your parents, your dad anyway, was probably really proud of you doing something like that, putting yourself out there and questioning things. And it's cool that he was able to overcome his original bias and is starting to look at it as well. Sometimes the older we are, the harder it is to, give up things like that. It's not necessarily the case, but you know what I'm saying. Younger people are easier to adapt to new information. So you know how it is. If you've got a problem with your computer, if you ask like a 7-year-old, they'll be able to fix it quicker than like a 65-year-old in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we talked a little bit about conspiracy, but let's talk a little bit deeper. 9/11, that's got to have been a seminal moment for you. I know it was for me. That's probably the thing that woke me up the most. And I thought I was awake until I found out about flat Earth. How did 9/11 affect you, Brian?
Well, I was 18 years old when I guess I just gave away my age, but I was 18 years old when it happened. I was in my freshman year of college, and it was a Tuesday, and I didn't have class that day. And I remember I was just at home and I was doing a little homework and kind of messing around on my computer, and turned on the TV, and then I thought it was a movie at first. It was some just like daytime movie or something, and then I started flipping channels and I started seeing a burning building, and then I actually saw the other plane hit the second tower, and back then I was young, I was naive. The buildings came down, and I didn't even know about Building 7 back then. And then the plane, we had the Pentagon incident, and then also what happened in Pennsylvania. And I was definitely I lived in a somewhat conservative household, and we thought we were attacked, and we kind of supported the war on terror and everything, and most people did at the time. Everybody was pretty angry about it. And then I just went on about my life. I had friends overseas fighting, and I always supported them. I was, always supported all the troops, and I never really questioned anything. And actually, in my last year of college, I actually took my time getting through college. I also worked construction models in college. I took some time off, and engineering is kind of hard too. So I spaced out my classes, but in the end of my senior year, I took structural steel design, which was my favorite class. Structural steel is my favorite. Most structural engineers like steel because it's so. I mean, it's the best material for us to use, and in my opinion, some people might agree with me, but disagree with me. But my structural steel class was great, and on my very first day of class, we had an adjunct professor from the Army Corps. He was a PhD, very smart guy, and he went over the syllabus like teachers typically do on the first day of class, and he he gave us a weird assignment. He said, "I'd like you guys to write a half to 1 page paper on what you think caused the destruction of the World Trade Center." And so I remember a lot of kids in the class thought that was weird, or a lot of other students, and we said, "Okay, let's go do it." And I remember a group of us, so a couple of friends of mine from the class and we all went to the computer lab, and we looked it up, and we looked up what the official story was, and we said, okay, the jet fuel heated up the joists in the building, and they started to sag, and the floor started to pancake and collapse, and then the whole building came down, and that's it. And the entire class said the same thing. Not one person questioned it. And then I remember it was odd. He said in the very next class when we came back, and everybody we discussed it. Everybody kind of said what they wrote about, and he just said, "That's what you guys think?" And we said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay." And then he just went on and taught the class. And so I never thought about it again. And so then I got out of college, and I started working, and I started working right at the beginning of the recession. So I worked more than I'd ever worked in my life just to stay employed. That's what all engineers were doing at that time, because you have to become a professional engineer, you have to work for 4 years before you can take your test to get your license. And so I was working insane hours, but I learned a lot, and I don't really regret it. And never really thought about 9/11 again. And then on September 11th in 2012, I just left the company. I just got my license, and I went to another company, and I made a lot of friends there. And somebody there sent me I don't know if you've ever seen the 9/11 a conspiracy theory. And it's a 5-minute video. It's actually pretty funny, like the way they lay the whole thing out, and it's very sarcastic and like, you guys, I mean,
Yes.
this is ridiculous. And so I laughed a little bit, but I first of all, I didn't know about Building 7, and that blew my mind. And then I know what stood out to me. Donald Rumsfeld announcing that $2.3 trillion was missing from the defense budget, and then of course the place that got hit by the plane at the Pentagon was where they were researching this, trying to figure out what happened to all the money. And I said, well, this is crazy. And the guy that sent it to me, I really respected a lot. He's very good at what he does. And so I said, okay, well, I don't believe this. Back then I was a patriot, but I'd heard some things from meeting new people at this company I was working at. I was starting to see some things. Some people had sent me some Alex Jones stuff, and I mean that's Alex Jones I don't want to get into his stuff, but
Go down that road.
yeah, but it does kind of open your mind a little bit, and you start to realize that things aren't what they seem to be. And so I saw this video and I said, wow, this is crazy. So for the next couple of weeks, I just said, okay, I got to prove this wrong. Like that's how I approach everything. Every conspiracy theory, I always try to prove it wrong first. And so I started doing calculations. I was studying building plans and looking at all kinds of things to try to figure out if these buildings were actually taken down by these planes. And then of course Building 7 was just like this thing achieved free fall acceleration on the way down, which I discussed free fall acceleration in episode 2, which is acceleration due to gravity. It's really the same thing. The roof of the building reached 9.81 meters per second squared, or 32.2 feet per second squared, however you want to look at it, whatever units you're using. And so that was just like, I'm thinking, I designed steel framing systems. I know how these things work, and the only way you could do that is if you move the columns out of the way somehow. I mean, that's the only way it could fall that fast. And so I said, this is crazy. I didn't want to believe it, but I was starting to. I mean, I got a little scared, to be honest, and I mean, because it's I wanted to know what happened to Building 7 first, because that thing, it wasn't hit by any planes. And so I started looking into it, and I found out that the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST as they're called, had done a model on this collapse, as they called it, and they said it was because of normal office fires. And first of all, I'd never heard of NIST before. There's a lot of organizations, a lot of you have American Society of Civil Engineers, you have ACI, the Concrete Institute, all these different organizations, all these alphabet organizations that create code that we're supposed to design things to. And so I'd never heard of NIST, and then I found out that they won't release their model of they'll show us the 3D rendering of the thing coming down, but they won't release the data. So we can't really look at it and analyze it and give it a peer review. And they say that releasing it to us would, I'm sure you've heard this, would jeopardize public safety. And I'm just, what? And so then I said, I remember one day I was like, let me get an engineer's take on this. And so I just typed in like structural engineer, World Trade Center, because I focused on the World Trade Center. That was the big one for me. And then I found architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. And so I started watching their videos, and I followed them for a long time. And, the thermite seemed possible. And but actually, I saw their 15-minute video, and that's when. And then I just watched Loose Change 9/11. I'd seen all these things. I remember the moment it hit me. I was at home. I was on the couch, and I actually got a little sick to my stomach. I was like, "This is insane!" Like the moment I realized that what we were told is not true, my world started spinning. And then I remembered my professor in college. I remembered him saying that. I was like, oh my gosh, he was trying to wake us up. He didn't believe it. And I started to wonder, is that why he came to teach this class? Because he wasn't a teacher. He just came, he really wanted to teach structural steel design. I'm like, whoa. And then recently, a couple of years ago, I found out from a friend of mine who took the course the next spring after me. He flat out told the class he didn't believe the story. And so then, but he even said, my friend that took the course said, but what are we going to do? We didn't really think much about it. We kind of thought maybe he was a little crazy or something. But I mean, to question mainstream belief is just, it's kind of frowned upon.
It's admirable that he did that. It's amazing, actually. He's, putting his job on the line, really.
Mm-hmm.
I wish more people would do that. I think it's great. And did he ever get fired? I mean, that's usually fired or killed. It seems that's what happens to people.
I've been trying to reach out to him, to contact him. I'm not going to give out his information or anything, but I've not been able to find him. He was an adjunct, though. He wasn't actually a professor at the university. So he was just, it was like he picked up a course because he wanted to teach teach or he wanted some extra money. I think it's because he wanted to teach, and I think he also wanted to say, hey, think about this. He wanted to get young minds to say, wait a second, why don't you question what you're being told here. But I need to look into see where he is and how he's doing, because I'd really like to talk to him, to be honest. And
I hope it's not a case of, and they never heard from him again, because you hear those stories a lot. It's Brian Mullin here, and my name is Patricia Steere, and this is Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes, and we're kind of talking about 9/11, speaking of other hot potatoes right now, but we are talking about Flat Earth, and whether you're a ball Earth skeptic or a flat earther, you're kind of both at the moment. You're still at this point trying to find proof of evidence that we live on a ball. What would be your biggest, the one thing or two things that are sticking points that are like, well, maybe we do live on a ball? Do you have any?
To be honest, no, I don't. Not anymore. The one thing that stuck with me until a few weeks ago, until I actually talked to, I was on a hangout last weekend, talking about the Southern Cross in the Southern Hemisphere, or the area south of the equator. I'd seen some things that they say that there's a pole star there, and that the stars orbit, or the stars rotate around a pole star, just like the North Star. What's supposed to make the stars rotate around our North Star is the spin of Earth, and so I'd never been to the Southern Hemisphere, so I didn't know how I could disprove that, and that is a big deal. And but then after talking to some people, they talk about how they don't actually rotate around that star. It's more of I've seen multiple stars spin, or I can't remember it was like 8 stars that actually seem to stay in the same place. I'd really like to just go to the Southern Hemisphere to prove it, or to see what's actually happening at night there. But even then, it's still, based on everything else I've seen, that there's still so much more evidence that screams flat and stationary, that I can't. There's not really anything making me think that the ball Earth is going to come roaring back, and I'm going to suddenly say, oh, it's been a ball all along. And especially when I think, I've only been looking at this for 9 months, and for 30 years of my life, I've been shown this ball that I'm supposed to live on, and all these globes and all these different things. And within just a few months, I was really questioning it. I mean, it's just, when you really start to look into the theories and really think about it, and just go outside and look around and look at your horizon, and think about the fact that you ever feel like you're moving. When you get on a plane and you're moving at 900 miles an hour in Orlando, and you fly to New York, and you get off the plane, and now you're moving at, not flying, but standing on the Earth, moving maybe around 700 miles per hour. You don't feel any change. You don't feel sick. Like, there's just, your senses kind of tell the story too as you're going along. So I don't really think I don't really think I'm going to go back to the ball Earth theory. There's just, I like to say that everything's a theory, just to take the science side of it. But I believe flat Earth theory now. I can say that.
Well, using your senses is great. You use different mathematical tools. That's not my particular thing, but I just use my senses, and those told me, along with all the different videos that I'd watched and books I've read, that we live on a flat Earth, the stationary Earth not moving. The spin thing, a lot of people don't understand that. They're like, well, I thought you said the Earth spun at 1,000 miles an hour, but at different parts of the Earth, it spins differently if you think about it. And if you're at the supposed poles, the spinning would vary greatly from what it would spin at the equator. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Can you add anything mathematical to that, Brian?
Oh yeah, I used this ball. This is a globe that I took apart and put this dowel through it. The dowel representing, back up a little bit, the dowel would be the axis, and as it spins, at the equator, as I said earlier, at this point on the equator right here, the circumference of the Earth there is just under 25,000 miles, and that's where you're spinning if you're standing on the equator at about 1,000 miles per hour. But as you go up away from the equator, as you get up here, the circumference of the Earth actually becomes much less, because it's still spinning around this axis. So that's why your speed becomes less, because velocity or speed is really, if you're up here somewhere, your circumference is less, and velocity or speed is really the distance divided by time. That's why it's miles per hour, or kilometers per hour, or meters per second, as I've been using in my problems. So all you have to do is you just use the curvature equation to figure out how far away from the equator you are, and you have to multiply that times 2 because on the other side of the Earth the diameter is also reduced, and so you just or you can just use the radius, and you take your radius at the equator, which is 3,959 miles, and subtract that from what you get using the curvature equation would be the decrease in the vertical distance if you drew a horizontal line out straight, if that makes sense, and that'll be you now have the radius, and the circumference of the Earth at that point is 2 pi r, which the radius is r, and so you can figure out the distance around, and then you just divide that by 24 hours because it's still going to take 24 hours to make one revolution, and that's how you figure out if what your speed is when you're not at the equator, if that makes sense. So
let's see that globe back again. I want to.
Sure.
Okay, so now you need to tilt the axis at approximately 33 degrees.
Yeah.
33 Masonic degrees, of course.
Well, it's actually 23.4 degrees, but
right.
It's 23.
The remainder.
It's 23.4 degrees to the elliptical, or I think it's the horizontal elliptical. But if you take that from the vertical this way, if you subtract 23.4 from the vertical, you get 66.6, which I think is strange. But somebody pointed that out. Actually, I think it was allegedly Dave that pointed that out in his video, which is a very good video. And
66. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know why I said 33. Either way, you lose. Either way, it's not good. Yeah. And it was done on purpose. It's put into our consciousness, I believe, on purpose, those numbers that they've made up. Why are there people out there who can say they can use math to prove we live on a globe? And I'm sure you've come in contact with various people who might not like the work you're doing, and they're doing it to prove that we live on a globe. What is it about their mathematics that can work, and how your mathematics can work? And how are we able to actually see what real truth is?
Well, that's kind of a tough question to answer because the math appears to work, but I'm going to have to go into every single proof of a spinning ball and actually take a look at it to give my opinion on it, to see where I can find a flaw. And that's actually what I did in episode 3. I went into to where they set the gravity equation equal to the centripetal force equation and show how that can be used to calculate the distance that planets are from the sun, and how I think there's a major flaw there because it basically cancels out the gravity that the whole thing is based on. There's things like they say refraction's what shows is why you can see things farther than you should be able to see them over the curve, but that's something that needs to be proved with experiments. But as far as the math goes, as far as the equations that prove it's a spinning ball, I never really did any problems like that in college. I never did any problems that showed that proved that we lived on a spinning ball. So there isn't really a lot out there, in my opinion. Now, if somebody can put something out there and show me that there is something that shows this, that would, please do, and I'd like to take a look at it. But I said in my first episode, one of the things I realized is I never did a proof. Ever, not in physics, not in college, nowhere. We never proved that we live on a spinning ball, and that seems very strange to me because we would sit in my engineering courses and we would break down equations. We would use calculus we would have a mathematical expression with all kinds of integrals or derivatives or whatever in it. I've always liked physics a little bit more than math, but because physics is actually real stuff, whereas math is just numbers, in my opinion. But we would break down these complex equations, and for the most part, always find out that they break down to a simple algebraic expression. But we would always go back to prove stuff that someone had done before, and somebody who had developed these theories and used very complex equations to come to this simple conclusion. And so I realized right away that we never did that with our spinning ball, with our world. We were just shown a ball and we were shown a picture, and that was a serious red flag for me. And that's when I started to do calculations, and I started to do curvature calculations. And I didn't even really think about how fast the Earth would have to spin at the equator until I looked into flat Earth theory. And that's when I'm like, well, wait a second. I said that in my first video. That's really ironic. I'm looking into flat Earth theory and I'm learning how fast the Earth spins and how much it curves now. This is very strange. But as far as proofs, there's not really a lot of mathematical proof out there, and that's or proof through physics, in my opinion, from what I've seen. A lot of the 10 proofs the Earth's a spinning globe, or that we live on a spinning globe. I mean, they're really, it's more visual stuff. I don't really see any physics or math in any of those sites or Facebook posts or things that people link. So maybe there's stuff out there that I haven't seen yet, but at the moment I really don't think there's much. I think there's a lot more that shows it's flat and stationary.
What about people who say that they're able to measure the distance to the sun, and they do that? It seems as if it's based on the fact that we live on a spinning ball. So the math can be from the very beginning flawed. Or explain that better than I just did. Won't take you much.
Well, that I need to look into a little more. I know they use relative distances, and they used this device called a sextant a long time ago, which I might be wrong on this, but basically it can say that the sun is 93 million miles away, and about 100 times, well, 110 times the diameter of Earth, or it's 33 miles away, 32 or 33 miles away, and about 3,000 miles above Earth, or maybe 6,000 miles. That I have to look into a little bit more. I'm focusing more on what's here first, or what's on the Earth first, and then of course what NASA's doing. But that's really how they say that they've figured out how far away the sun is. It's kind of an observation thing, and I know that they said that in the 60s apparently they bounced radio. We're told they bounced radio waves off of Venus, and they could tell how far away Venus was, and then they used that to try to triangulate the position of the sun. And they do that with the other. That's what we've been told they've done with the other planets. But then at the same time, once they got the distance from Earth, what I showed in episode 3 is when they set the centripetal force equation equal to the gravity equation. Now, if you know the amount of time it takes something to go around the sun, which if the wandering stars or the planets are orbiting the sun, then we know the time it would take to orbit them, because we know how long it takes before for it to appear one place in the sky and then come back to that position. So as I said in episode 3, Jupiter takes 11.86 years, so we know that time, so we can actually solve for the radius based on how the relationship works. But I don't agree with that, because the way the equation breaks down, you cancel out the mass of the object that's actually orbiting the Earth, so the force, in my opinion, goes away. So the whole concept of gravity is kind of gone, and it's not very logical. You really have to watch. You would really have to watch episode 3, or if nobody's seen that, to understand what I'm saying. It's too hard to explain without a whiteboard or a piece of paper to write on. But yeah, it's kind of speculative, in my opinion, especially when it comes to the distance of stars. I remember in my astronomy class saying, they're just using relative brightness and luminosity, as they called it. But now, especially after looking into flat Earth theory, I'd never thought about how my vision actually works, and the perspective, and when things get so far away. I actually drew this earlier, if I've got it over here. Where did I put that? As things get farther away, they get smaller and smaller, and they say these stars are trillions of miles away or thousands of light years away. My thought is, if it's a star, it's going to have to be thousands of times bigger than our sun for us to be able to see it, because it would be too small. So now here we go. Kind of drew this earlier to show how our perspective works. Like, say that would be the center of your view. As this moves away, all of these lines and the points and the corners and the tops of the page and where my fingers are, eventually they all come together at that point in the center as things move farther and farther away from you. So that's one thing we never really talk about in school or in general. I mean, science kind of alludes to the fact that we can see infinitely far. I'm getting a little off topic about what you asked about, how far away the sun is, but I think that plays a lot into it, because they also say the sun appears to be the exact same size as the moon because of how far away it is, and it shrinks. So they accept that, but then tell us that these stars are just so far away, and that we don't see any movement in the stars, and we only see them spin, make perfect circles around the North Star because of the Earth's spin, and then the fact that we're supposedly rotating around the Earth at 67,000 miles per hour, and then the Earth or rotating around the Sun at 67,000 miles per hour, and then the Sun is rotating around the center of the galaxy at over 500,000 miles per hour. We don't see any movement in the stars because with all that those velocities happening that are much faster than the rate at which the Earth is spinning, because they're just really far away. It really, when you start to think about that, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But
well, what about when we watch movies? And I know movies are, make believe, but whenever a ship, let's say Star Trek, is approaching a planet, the planet is stationary. It's round, yes, for the most part. There's been some other shaped planets in sci-fi, but the general planets are round, and they're just sitting there, not moving. So maybe they were trying to tell us something way back then, in a way.
Yeah, that could be. I did mention that in my first episode. It's arguable. I mean, it's really hard to try to wrap your head around how fast it would be spinning. It would be moving though. So, and if it's moving at 1,000 miles per hour, that's pretty quick. But then you can also argue that the diameter is very big. So it's kind of hard to argue that, and it's also a movie too. So I mean, we haven't actually. I don't think we've ever actually seen footage of our Earth rotating in space. In fact, that's one of the things I first looked up when I saw Matt Powerland's first video. Is he was talking about how there's only a couple real photos of the Earth, and he was also pointing out that they appear to be photoshopped. And so I said, well, I think he might have actually said this in his video. What about a video of our Earth spinning in space? We've sent all these probes out to the edge of our galaxy. Apparently, we've sent Galileo out there. All these different probes, Curiosity, all these different things have gone out, far enough to take video of our Earth spinning in space. And so I looked this up, and the only thing I found, this was back at the beginning of the year, was the 1990 Galileo mission. It was the only spacecraft that had ever taken video of the Earth spinning. And actually, Matt Powerland did point this out, or Matt Mullin did point this out, because in the video, it shows the Earth do one complete rotation, and the clouds don't move at all. They stay in the exact same place. And so that's 24 hours if it makes one complete rotation. And, on the Earth I live on, I look up at the sky, and 15 minutes later, the clouds are in all different places. They're moving all over the place. And for them to stay stationary for 24 hours, that blew my mind. I said, that's definitely fake. I mean, it cannot be real. And then we find out that all the other images of Earth's movement are composites. Up until very recently, I think a month or two ago, they released the dark side of the moon, and I mean that thing. I just rolled my eyes. I just said, "This is ridiculous. That looks so fake." And the clouds again don't move, and there's no stars in the background, just like in the other video. So I don't know.
That particular piece of NASA trash, and the one is where we had a probe or satellite go out beyond the moon and then take a picture of the moon going across Earth. That's one of the worst pieces of mind programming I've ever seen. It's pretty much just as bad as the Virginia TV newscaster hoax. How fake that was. That's the space version of that, where anybody can look at it and wake up, you'd think anyway. But no, people are saying, I mean, I remember seeing that being posted on Facebook among people. Ooh, how interesting, how wonderful. Look at our beautiful Earth. And I wanted to scream, wake up. That's not the moon. That's a cookie going across a ball, which we don't live on. So it's funny. It's humorous. I mean, there is a light side to flat Earth. It gets really heavy and very heated with different people debating each other and their particular models. But sometimes you have to step back and just shake your head and think to yourself, this is hilarious. I mean, the joke's been on us, of course, but laughing at it makes you feel a little bit better. Take it a little bit lighter. We were talking earlier about 9/11, and I want to jump back to that. And you were saying first that Alex Jones was a part of your life for a brief time. For me too, as well. I was into the Alex Jones thing for a short period of time before I realized what that was. I think a lot of conspiracy investigation is like that. You start somewhere, and most people end up seeing that for what it is, and then leaving, and then moving on to something else. You said you also kind of got trapped in architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. What about them caused you to move away and to move forward in your thoughts about what really happened with 9/11?
Well, I debated for a long time on signing their petition. I had talked to a lot of friends of mine that were engineers, and most people just didn't want to hear it. People would get scared. People would get angry. I was even called un-American, even though I thought this country was founded on the ability to question your government. So I would get angry about that, and I spent a lot of time angry. But then I kind of just let go of everything after I found out about that. But I decided to sign their petition, and so I filled out the online application, and it seemed very legitimate at first. They called me to give a phone interview and ask me questions. I had to submit my transcripts to them. I had to submit my license information to show that I was a licensed engineer, and so I said everything was going good until when they called me, they started to ask me questions about how I discovered this, how I came about it, what I thought, and one of the questions I thought that was a red flag for me is they said, have you looked into any of the alternative theories besides their theories about thermite, that about the nuclear weapon or the free energy or an energy type device or anything else? And if when someone asks you a question, you should also, while you're thinking about how to answer it, you should also think about why they're asking you that question. And so I thought to myself, I knew that I should say no right away because I knew why they were asking me that, because their theory is thermite. And so I said no, not really, and I just went about my day. And they said, okay, well, we're gonna put your name on the petition and everything. And then I was such an activist in 9/11 Truth at the time that I was actually going to join them. They set me up an email address, and I was going to go try to talk to congressmen and whoever else I could try to wake up, because it was a huge deal to me. I was very upset about it, and now I realize it's not something that there's a bigger thing that we should be worried about. But so I started thinking about that a lot, and somebody had actually mentioned the work of Dr. Judy Wood to me, and I thought that was, it sounded really far-fetched, but it was just one of those things. It's kind of like the flat earth thing. I was just like, well, you know what the heck, I'll watch her YouTube video on. And so I started listening to her talk, and within minutes of listening to her talk, I realized that she was an engineer. And you can tell an engineer. I mean, we're kind of nerdy, and we know we always like to use PowerPoints and explains things very methodically and thoroughly. And I listened to her presentation, this 2-hour presentation, and what she does is she just actually analyzes every little piece of what happened that day. And I was blown away. The whole thing for me is, there's this building is the Twin Towers are coming down, and there is just opaque dust pouring off of the structural members that are falling. I mean, the exterior columns, these are solid structural steel members that are just falling out of the sky, and there's just dust pouring off of them. And people try to say that's concrete or whatever, but I'm watching structural steel turn to dust. I have no idea what did that. I don't make weapons, but I do know that structural steel doesn't turn to dust, because that's why we use it, because it's a great material for holding buildings up. And so she pointed that out, and she thinks it's some kind of energy weapon. And the other thing she pointed out was that 1,000,000 tons of structural steel just disappeared. And I don't think there's enough energy content in explosives to make that happen. So I started to say, wait a second, she's got some really good points here. And then I found out that there was some serious that AE 9/11 Truth really trashed her, and I started looking into her, and she got her civil engineering degree, her master's in structural engineering, and her PhD in structural engineering from Virginia Tech. That is one of the best, that's most well-respected engineering schools in this country. And then after that, she taught at Clemson, another very well-respected engineering school, for 7 years. And then she left her teaching position because this was such a big deal to her to try to get the word out. And right then I said, whoa, something's not right here. They're really, science is all about being open to theories and challenging all theories. And that's what I'm doing with flat earth. I'm saying I'm making the sphere theory and the spinning sphere theory and the flat and stationary theory compete with each other, and flat and stationary is winning, but at least in my mind. And so that's what they should be doing too. They should be looking at all possible scenarios, but it's only thermite. That's it. That's what happened. They're convinced. And then some things happened back in 2013 when I was taking astronomy. their campaigns that came out started to seem really cheesy to me, like they weren't really trying, and it just something wasn't sitting right, and the idea of controlled opposition hit me, and then I think about that famous Vladimir Lenin quote, the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves. So it kind of I realized that it was such a mess at that point that it's just, and nobody would even listen. And how do you explain to somebody that's not a structural engineer why this is absolutely impossible? I mean, at least the technical side. I mean, so a lot of people do see it right away. I mean, just through intuition. But I didn't. I kind of gave up, to be honest with you, at that point. I definitely think that Judy Wood is really onto something, and she's being shunned. She has to go to other countries to talk about this. I hope she's okay, to be honest, because she gives a really good presentation, and she's on point, I would say.
Yeah, and I have her book, Where Did the Towers Go? Where Did the Towers Go as well? And yeah, I'm with you on Dr. Judy Wood, of course, until something else is presented to me that shows otherwise. But if you go to see like Clues Forum and Simon Shack, they really rip her apart there as well. Kind of like the architects and engineers. That's maybe another level of controlled opposition, although they have some good information. There's good information everywhere. That's the thing. You've got to find out what's the good information that's not a form of controlled opposition. But it's Matrix Decode put it very well about Clues Forum. He said it's a, quote, limited hangout, unquote. So, it seems to be that way. But I'm all for Dr. Judy Wood. And I do as well, I kind of worry about her. What's going to happen with her? But she's got some great information. So, and, I'm glad to hear how 9/11 affected you. It is really the Great Awakening, I think, for most of us. And then, of course, once you think you've learned it all, Flat Earth comes into your life, and it's like Great Awakening Part 2. This time it's serious. So, how would you, we only have a few more minutes left, but how would you, Brian Mullin, suggest that somebody tell a family member or a friend or a coworker about Flat Earth? What are some ways that we can do it without being basically shunned?
It's that I'm trying to figure out, to be honest with you. It's very tough. Maybe the curvature, start talking about the horizon. If you say flat Earth, it's basically over. They're just going to laugh at you, and so that's a real problem here. And there's so many things we need to figure out about what this world really is, in my opinion. And we really need to get more people to open their eyes so we can go explore it. And I think the Antarctic Treaty is a very good thing to point out. Say, hey, why aren't we allowed to go to Antarctica? That'll really get people's minds turning. Why did the Soviet Union and NATO all, they're rapidly building nukes to point at each other in the late 50s, and then all of a sudden they can come together and agree that nobody can go to Antarctica? I mean, that's something to point out. Maybe the UN flag, that was a big one for me. Why does the UN flag use this map? Don't say what it is. Say what is it? Why do they use this this map instead of the Mercator map or something else? And maybe the Earth's rotation. Think about that. Have you ever thought about how fast you're spinning, or have you ever thought about how much the Earth is actually curved? Maybe the moon landing, if they're open to that. I mean, some people really get angry about that, but that's a good one to get started on.
I think it's essential, actually, to break the spell that the moon landing has on you first before you're able to step forward. Because a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, the moon landing was faked, and it's just because we faked it, something pertaining to the Russians." And they'll say, "Well, what's going on now? Well, that's real, totally. The ISS is up there, but they faked all that other stuff. They had to." So you can't really trust a liar ever. So breaking that whole spell that the moon landing has on us is very essential. And it's actually really sad too that the greatest achievement supposedly of mankind is actually doesn't really exist yet. Maybe it will be freeing our flat Earth. That would be really actually the greatest achievement, don't you think?
Yeah, at this point, that would I think that would bring humanity together and make everyone realize that all these. Everybody in a political position around the world, I mean, whoever you think is good or bad, they're all on the same side. They're all on the side of power. And if this is true, they're all hiding it from us because Russia has a space program, and so does China. And there are people at the top that know this. And it's something to really consider if this is a massive conspiracy, which it appears to be to me, that we need to actually start communicating with each other and stop listening to what they're telling us, and use YouTube and our social media while we still can to get out there and say, hey, stop going to stop sending your kids to schools to become indoctrinated. We can teach each other what we think the truth is, or what actually makes a lot more sense. And I don't know how that's going to happen. People are going to resist that, but if we can hit critical mass and people can really start waking up to this, I think we'll see humanity united in a way that's never happened before, because we can communicate so easily now.
I think that's wonderful, and I really love your channel, and I'm going to definitely continue watching your videos and sharing them on my Facebook, Patricia Steere, and also my Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes Facebook page. So I will be looking forward to more videos from you, and I think that they're great teaching tools, especially for people who need mathematics as proof. Other people need other things. Other people work better with theories or, art, visual sorts of things. But hey, math is an art. It's not an art that I'm particularly good at, but I'm glad there are people like you out there. So it saves me the trouble of sweating over a piece of paper and all the things that you put out. You put it out in such a way that it's easy for people who are mathophobes to understand. So I definitely want to give you kudos for that, making your dad proud. Thank you for being here. And I forgot to ask you one more question. Why balls out physics? I mean, there's the obvious reason, but before I say goodbye, how'd you get that name? How did it come to you?
I was thinking about a name for a while, and I was actually I just walked outside one day and it hit me, balls out physics. I didn't want to call it flat Earth physics, because I figured that would turn engineers and scientists off right away, because they'd say, what is this flat Earth physics? I'm not even going to bother watching this. And so I was trying to come up with a name that would not only allow me to kind of hide what I was really showing at first. I don't want to be deceiving people, but to get somebody to watch it, and it's kind of an ambiguous name, and it allows me to also question other things, not just flat Earth theory as well. I'd really like to look into I'd really like to do an episode on the double slit experiment, and a lot of different things. And so it just kind of, I was thinking spinning ball physics, and then it just kind of balls out, hit me. It's kind of that's
it's perfect. Yeah, and that's kind of why I've got Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes. So I'm allowed the opportunity to discuss other issues, or 9/11 or something along the lines, as long as I'm talking about Flat Earth too. But I think I'm not going to tell you what to do here. But if you put Flat Earth in the title of your videos, you'd probably get more hits. Maybe you could put Flat Earth ? Like after balls out physics.
I've thought about that. Some people have suggested that to me, and I feel like I would get more people who are researching flat Earth theory. So I'm still debating on that one. I might do it. It's just a question in my mind at the moment. But maybe I'll let the videos that actually I don't get disproven, then I'll put flat Earth in there. So.
Well, people will always have questions and post comments, and and have issues with things that you post. But that's the nature of YouTube. That's why comments are enabled for those who have comments enabled on their videos. And I think it's fun. I think I've taken a policy of enabling all comments. I won't delete any comments, even those with profanity. Even the spam trying to sell me Ray-Ban sunglasses. I'll just approve them all and let them go, and people can make up their own mind about what they see. Once again, thank you, Balls Out Physics, and it's Brian Mullin, and this is Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes. I'm Patricia Steere, and keep it flat.